Hi, my name is Laurie, and I struggle with bipolar disorder type 2 and borderline personality disorder. So, two things if you watch my channel. Number one, you know that I've really been struggling with depression lately. And I have reason to be depressed because the circumstances in my life are absolutely horrible and absolutely terrifying. But I also have bipolar disorder, and I have been in a major depressive episode recently. If you watch my videos, you know that I've been taking omega-3 fish oil, the right milligrams. I finally got on the right milligrams, and it did improve my depression, and I've had some good days and some bad days. Yesterday was a horrible day. I cried all day long. I was completely hopeless. I could not have a positive thought to save my life. It was a really, really bad and distressing day. But then today I woke up and I felt pretty good. So at least it's starting to lessen. I'm not having symptoms every day, all day long. It's definitely starting to improve because today I'm having a good day. And I thought, okay, today's the day to get, YouTube videos done. Today is the day to get dishes done. It's the day to get laundry done. I started focusing on what I could do since I felt good. Well, one of the videos that I did was for Christians struggling with mental illness, and I talked about how your mental illness and the symptoms from that are separate or different than your relationship with God and your peace with God. That it has nothing to do with your faith or your trust. It is physiological problem in the brain causing symptoms, and you're having trouble regulating your emotional responses, and that's not your fault, and it has nothing to do with your faith. And I thought a great way to show you that, and also to help me, was to go over some of the famous Christians that struggled with depression and struggled with anxiety. And these are people that are well regarded. I mean, people look up to them. These are people that spent their lives in faith with God, working for God, talking to others about God. They had faith, but they struggled with depression and anxiety. And so I thought maybe this might help someone. Now, I will have to read a little bit because there was no way that I could memorize all of this. But one of the people is Martin Luther. Martin Luther himself had written that the content of the depression was always the same: the loss of faith that God is good and that He is good to me. Now, I understand that because when I get severely depressed and all I can see and all I can feel is the negative and the hopelessness, because that part of my brain that produces the positive thoughts is obviously not working, or the part of the brain that produces the negative thoughts is overworking. I don't know, I'm not a doctor. But I get that because you look at the world and it seems hopeless and everything is wrong. And you can see a commercial and start crying and thinking about how unfair the world is and why would God allow this and why would God do this? And then when you're in a better mood and you're feeling better, well, then you start to understand, or you start to think about, that we sin, and because of that, there are consequences. And sometimes it's not just us struggling with the consequences, but other people suffer for it. So anyway, the next one is, now this is not Mother Teresa. This is a Catholic mystic, Saint Teresa of Avila. And she suffered with depression and panic attacks. Sometimes I felt as if sharp teeth had hold of me, and so severe was the pain they caused that I was feared I was going mad. In her classic work, Inner Castle, she states, "The depression which can afflict the soul is comparable only with the tortures of hell." Now, I can completely understand that too, because I cannot tell you how many times that I have thought and believed and said out loud that I live in hell on earth. I absolutely have lived in hell on earth. Now, can I really know that for sure? No, because I haven't been to hell, and also hell is for an eternity. But I understand that pain. The famous preacher Charles Spurgeon. Charles Spurgeon lived in the 1500s, and he was a really famous preacher. I still hear preachers today that will refer back to him and back to his work. He struggled with depression so bad that he would have to take 2 to 3 months off a year and not be able to preach because he was so sick from the depression. I don't know if he was just laid up in his house in the bed asleep, like a lot of us, end up doing, or what he was doing, but he was so sick that he couldn't preach. And what he said was, I am the subject of depressions of spirit so fearful that I hope none of you ever get to such extremes of wretchedness as I go through. He explained that during these depressions, every mental and spiritual labor had to be carried on under protest of spirit. My spirits were sunken so low that I could weep by the hour like a child, and yet I knew not what I wept for. So here he is explaining, everything that I did was so hard and such a struggle that I had to fight it. And if you've been in deep depressions like I have, you know it is a fight just to get your teeth brushed, just to get a shower, just to get in the car and do something like that you have to do. Like, it is so hard. That part of our brain is just not working. It is just not clicking. And so he talks about how hard it was just to get the little things done. And I imagine that's why he was unable to preach for months at a time. And then he talked about, I was sunken so low that I could weep every hour like a child, and yet he didn't even know why he was crying. Well, that's the way I was yesterday. I cried all day long, and sometimes it was a thought that I had. Sometimes it was something that I saw on television. Sometimes I would be sitting there watching television and nothing happened, and I would just feel the tears coming on, and I would burst into tears, and I would cry, and I would be so sad, and I would think, this isn't fair. Like, life's not fair. Why am I having to go through this? Nothing even triggered it. So I know, and if you have been depressed like that, like, you know what he's talking about too. And it's important to remember, like I said, this is a preacher. This is a man that people still talk about his works today in church. And yet he was struggling so much with depression, but he was still a man of God. He still had faith. He still trusted God. And maybe like me, when you get in those depths of despair and you can't think positively, your faith is harder and it's just different and it's a struggle, and you do look around and think, why would God allow these things to happen? But think about King Solomon in the Bible. Even he was saying, what is it? Everything is useless under the sun, or everything. Even he, looked around the world and couldn't see the good in it, but realized that God was the only good and that the most important thing was to follow him. So there's Mother Teresa. Everybody, pretty much knows of Mother Teresa, who went to Calcutta and helped the dying. And she struggled with depression all throughout her life. And she especially struggled once she did get to Calcutta. And I think probably a lot of it were the circumstances that she was around. And it was hard to be cheerful and it was hard to be hopeful. But she really struggled. And she said, there is such terrible darkness within me, as if everything was dead. It has been like this more or less from the time I started this work. And so she was really struggling. Now, I have a couple of examples of people that are a little, maybe you might have heard of. They are still living, and so there's one called Lecrae, and I guess in the 80s, and he still performs, but I guess in the 80s, he was a famous Christian hip-hop recording artist, and he really struggled with depression. And what Lecrae did, he was really famous and wealthy, and he was doing well, but he struggled with depression and despair. And so what he was saying was that you need to find your purpose in that. And so he would say to his audiences, don't be ashamed of your depression. The wounds of your depression and the scars of your depression show other wounded people that wounds can heal. And that's just like today. I mean, here I am showing you that, listen, I cried all day yesterday. I was hopeless. I didn't want to be in this world. I had no idea what I was going to do or how I was going to survive or how I was going to make it in this world. There was not a positive thought all day long. And yet today, here I am having positive thoughts, hoping that I can say something that might help someone else, thinking that I can get through this. Like, I'm going to get through this. So, depression doesn't last forever, and it may be different things for different people. Sometimes if you have bipolar, you just naturally are going to cycle out of it. Sometimes it's something like for me where it's having the right vitamins and nutrients and making sure I get my omega-3s, and that pulls me out. For someone else, it might actually be prescription strength medicine, which, listen, I am a big proponent of. If I could have taken, medications all throughout the years and leveled my brain out or stabilized my moods, I could have had a completely different life. I wouldn't be struggling, I can't be sure, but I don't think that I would be struggling the way that I am, because I would have made different decisions and my life just probably would have turned out differently. So I am big on if medication helps, because medication is not changing who you are. Medication is balancing out the chemicals in your brain so that you can be who you would have been if you had had a healthy brain. It's kind of like having strep throat. Amoxicillin is not changing anything. It's just taking away the actual illness and the symptoms of that illness so that you feel better and get back to what you were doing. That might not have been a great example. I should have used something else, like maybe even diabetes or something like that. But anyway, off the top of my head, that was the first thing I came up with. The next one is Sheila Walsh. She is a Bible teacher, famous author, and former co-host of a popular TV show. She has impacted the lives of millions. Now, she really struggled with clinical depression, and she also struggled with anxiety. She said, she said, I am profoundly grateful for the gift of mental illness, because I can look in the eyes of someone struggling today and meet you there. Now, I can't say that I am grateful for mental illness. I know that there are people that look back at their lives and say, I am grateful for everything that happened because it led me to where I am today. Well, if I were in a good place today, I might feel that way, but I'm not. My whole entire life is crumbling down around me. I may not have a place to live in 6 weeks, and I have no idea where to go and what to do. So I'm never going to be grateful for mental illness, but I definitely understand what she's saying, because I am so sensitive. Can't think of the word. I am so sensitive to other people and their moods. I am so sensitive and notice almost immediately if someone's having a bad day, if someone is struggling. And my first reaction is to say something or do something to help them. Just anything to help them in their struggle, because I know what it's like to struggle. I know that pain. I know that heartache. I know how hard it is. And so I'm very empathetic. And I do love that part about me. I'm not grateful for mental illness. I wished I could have gotten it another way, like just naturally been sweet and kind and empathetic instead of having to struggle so much to get there. But that is something that I have noticed, and maybe you've noticed that about yourself. And sometimes we think that, God doesn't use us, and yet he uses us in little ways. I mean, I have done things like for a neighbor that lives upstairs and can't get out of the house, made brownies. And he loved that. He absolutely loved that, and thrilled him so much and made me feel so good about it that now every once in a while I'll take over brownies, because I know how much he appreciates it. So don't get discouraged and think that, because you're going through depression and, because you're struggling with mental illness, that your life is meaningless and it doesn't matter, because it is the small things in life. I just had some neighbors the other night who brought over, they had made a big pan of lasagna and garlic bread, and they thought of me. And they came over, knocked on the door, and brought me that lasagna. And the kids were there, and they were all excited. And Laurie, hey, and that just absolutely thrilled me to death. That absolutely made me feel so good because I knew my neighbors had thought about me. My neighbors like me. My neighbors are special to me. And it's the little things in life. So please, if you are depressed, don't get discouraged. Don't give up because, somehow, some way, you're going to find the right answer for you, and you're going to help pull yourself out of that, and you're going to be able to use it for good and use it to help others. Thank you for watching.